This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
The FDA just conducted a hearing on May 31st, 2019 about appropriately regulating CBD. CBD is a dietary supplement, a broad category that includes many of the most popular CBD products, things you think of like capsules and oils. They're currently illegal under FDA rules. The hearing pulled in a variety of stakeholders, from cosmetics to dietary supplements to drugs to medical marijuana, and each stakeholder had a different request, but they all agreed that the lack of regulations was hugely problematic. Interestingly enough, each hoped that they'd convince the FDA to regulate them in a way that's favorable to their interpretation. So, for example, there were mothers who were claiming that marijuana drove their children to suicide. There were entrepreneurs who were struggling for a good answer when the regulators actually asked, well, so what effect does CBD have in cosmetics? And high-end industry lawyers who were pitching regulatory frameworks that might make sense. So there were a lot of people there. One of the most interesting voices, if you will, would be Alice Mead, who is the Vice President of U.S. Professional Relations for Greenwich Biosciences. That's the company behind Epidiolex, the FDA's first approved CBD-based drug. And they pointed out the lack of objective safety information that's associated with the product. For example, Greenwich spent the last 20 years researching this plant. Resultantly, because of their efforts, we now have discovered that CBD is potentially toxic to the liver. So the FDA held this meeting. What does the FDA want? So the FDA looked at this hearing to get answers and to get data on how best to regulate cannabis. To that end, the FDA officials were clear that they wanted more data and less subjective opinions, if you will. Speaker after speaker was asked to submit well-documented clinical studies, and most were lacking in this case. For example, some couldn't even answer simple questions like, how young is too young for exposing consumers to CBD? And is CBD psychoactive? So if those basic questions couldn't be answered, it's difficult to discuss, well, how should the FDA actually go about regulating it? So that raises the question of, why is there a need for regulation? So the need for regulation comes from the inconsistent patchwork of rules that govern the use of cannabis. While the cannabis plant generally provides primarily two basic substances, and there are several, there's CBD and THC. THC tends to be heavily regulated through the DEA, while CBD is potentially acceptable at the federal level, depending on the presence of THC and the prolonged use and the prospective use. Inappropriate promotion can lend a potential promotional piece and render it a violative of federal law and expose individuals and companies to administrative fines, to civil penalties, and even criminal punishment. So while this is going on, many states actually allow for the use of cannabis for medical and or recreational uses. Nevertheless, the use of the product will govern the specific types of claims that can be made. Recreational products that make medical claims, as is routinely seen in these medical shops, in these cannabis shops, may not only fall afoul of federal law, but may be rendered illegal under state law as well, whether or not the product actually contains THC or CBD. Similarly, states may require that marketing of medical cannabis adhere to federal laws as it relates to the promotion of products and or the manufacture or sale of such products. So, in addition to the state and federal dichotomy, if you will, cities have actually gone out and said that sometimes it's simply not worth it to enforce laws as they apply to certain petty crimes. And this has effectively led to the quote-unquote decriminalization of the possession of cannabis within certain limits. So as you can see, the confusing jigsaw puzzle of laws and regulations makes it incredibly easy to fall afoul of the requirements and expose companies and individuals to fines, penalties, or even jail. So companies are looking for specific guidance to ensure that they do not risk exposure. So the big question, what is the big takeaway? So what is the big implication for a company like yours? So the FDA is likely to take its sweet time creating the regulations, since it does need to coordinate with multiple agencies. There was a recent FDA hearing, probably about 2 years ago, on how the FDA should deal with off-label promotion of pharmaceuticals. And we still have not heard anything from the FDA on what they're actually going to do. So it's been over 2 years, and that simply wouldn't continue or cannot continue in the CBD space because the fines and penalties that people are looking at extend into criminal penalties, which is also a real threat to many, many people and many, many jobs. So until then, there are numerous instances of companies and individuals facing jail time because of falling afoul of the types of promotional activities and the types of work that individuals are doing in this cannabis, CBD, THC space. So to ensure that you aren't one of them, call the FDA regulatory lawyer you know and trust, and you can reach me at the Kulkarni Law Firm. My name is Darshan Kulkarni at 215-948-8183. That's 215-948-8183.
Thank you for listening to the Darshan Talks podcast, Regulatory Guy, Irregular Podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. If you have any questions for Darshan, reach out via Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.